So I was invited by 2K to go play Mafia 3 in Amsterdam before the game's release. Now I made a separate video about the event itself and about the delicious hamburger I got. In case you are interested in seeing that video, you should totally click on it right now. But in this video, I'll take a more in-depth look at the game itself. So we got to play a pre-release build of the game on PC for about 6 hours. It was divided up into 2 sections, the first section being the intro of the game, which we were not allowed to record for spoiler reasons. The second section was a bit further into the game, which we were allowed to record with some limitations. Now before I get into the game itself, the footage you're seeing right now was recorded at 1080p 30 FPS. I wanted to put it on 60 FPS and actually bump up the recording quality, but the footage was being recorded directly to an external USB drive, and the IT guy there was instructed to put it on these settings, and I wasn't too sure about what a USB cable can handle. So the FPS was just a tiny bit higher than the 30 frames per second you're seeing right now. Anyways, Mafia 3, it's the sequel to Mafia 2, which was the sequel to Mafia 1. Who would have guessed? This time around you play as Lincoln Clay, a half-black, pretty buff Vietnam War veteran. The game takes place in 1968 in New Bordeaux, which is pretty much as New Orleans with a different name. Now Lincoln finds himself being on the wrong end of being shot in the head, with his close friends being murdered in front of him by the Italian mob. So he's out for revenge, and he does decide to take over the city piece by piece from the Italian mob. And that is the abridged version of the intro. I was then dropped about 15 hours into the game, where I was actually allowed to record. So your aim is to take over districts of the city, and you do this by first taking down crime rackets within those districts. You take down the racket leaders, then the district leader, and once that's done and over with, you assign it to one of your favorite pals. One of whom is Vito from Mafia 2. He's back. A tiny bit grayer, but he is definitely back. So I was in the French ward and tasked with taking down the crime rackets there. But instead I first decided to indiscriminately punch pedestrians. Clayton has some anger management issues. And I drove around for a bit to see what the driving was all about. So besides the game's combat difficulty, there is a separate driving difficulty. You choose from normal as well as simulation. So I put mine on simulation of course, because I'm not a filthy casual. And in simulation mode, the driving felt pretty solid. The cars felt like they had some actual weight to them, like they weren't super glued to the road. But I had to find the quickest way to maneuver around the city without any other cars in my way. So I used the sidewalk, which seemed to work out perfectly until I hit this pole. Also, I inadvertently got a brand spanking new red paint job. I then got into a police chase at the statue, so it was the perfect time to see what my AKM could do. Then the police somehow lost me in the flowers, and I picked up a Playboy that somebody just left there for me. Anyways, the police found me again. I shot this police cruiser to shit and pulled off a magic maneuver. And then the police shot me. Obviously, because I'm black. But after I was resurrected, I started taking down those rackets within the French ward. Well, I first investigated my Playboys just a tiny bit further, but then I started with the sex racket. I took on the role of a hitman. But I had to buy some guns first, as I sorta ran out of ammo murdering all those cops in self-defense. So I called in an illegal arms dealer and bought some premium weaponry from the back of this shady van, right next to a police cruiser. Anyways, with my new suppressed M1911, I started taking out goons, sliced this guy's throat, smacked an eyewitness to death, and eliminated my target. And then I smacked another eyewitness to death. You gotta make sure you don't leave any witnesses. But my target had a scoped gewehr on him, which he didn't really seem to need anymore, so I took it. Now at this point, I was already a seasoned hitman, so at my next target I just pistol whipped everyone. I took out my target who was seemingly receiving fellatio. So yeah, the stealth in this game is pretty standard. If you're undetected, you got one-hit takedowns, and the enemies are a tiny bit blind and deaf, meaning that you can pull off some pretty sneaky beaver combos if you're quick and observant. But since the night was still young, I decided to go for my third target. This time I threw the sneaky beaver tactic out the window and went for quick scopes instead, which seemed to work out well enough. There was a close call in there, but for my target I decided to do something special. A 360 no-scope. More or less. Anyways, I then realized that the sex racket was going to take way too long and that the drugs racket was nearly bled out. So I focused my quickscoping efforts on the drugs racket instead. I tried to take the expressway down to my contact, but that didn't really seem to work out. But after talking to him, I tried busting up this illegal poker game. Unfortunately, I missed about every shot, so I had to resort back to my pistol whip tactic. I then tried taking the expressway down again to meet my contact. This time, I did not do a belly flop, but I sort of got stuck between this rebel and this barrel. I was literally imprisoned. So I tried to propel my way out, which didn't really seem to work. Then I tried even harder, which did work, more or less. Anyways, with that illegal poker game out of the way, it was time to take down the Racket leader. So I walked straight into this bar, I stabbed the first guy I saw in the jugular with my knife, then the second guy, then the third guy. I was just stabbing everyone. But then I got spotted and all hell broke loose. Backup arrived, I nearly got surrounded, but I pulled through due to my excellent aim with the gewehr. I had to take out this lady that would just not stop screaming, and then I was ready to take out the boss. So I threw a grenade as a distraction, shot his bong, shot him in the face, twice, and then I got shot. Obviously because I'm black. But after I wore back in time, I decided to be a sneaky beaver the entire way through. And since this boss had such a resilient face, I made extra sure this time. I threw 2 frag grenades, I emptied my gewehr in his chest, and I slit his throat. And then, just to make sure, I stabbed him in the heart as well. And all of this seemed to be just about enough to finally take him down. After my victory, I goofed around for a bit. I investigated what cars would do in combination with water. So apparently, cars don't float. Then I tried mounting my car on a boat, which had some interesting results. But yeah, that is pretty much the story of what I did when I played Mafia 3, so overall I had a good time playing this game. The gunplay is solid, you've got one one-handed weapon and one two-handed weapon you could select. The gun sounds are beefy, you've got health bars which regen if they're partially depleted. And if they're fully depleted, you've got to use an adrenaline shot. The stealth, as I already mentioned, is pretty standard. You've got one-hit takedowns if you're undetected, and you can whistle to get somebody's attention. The driving feels pretty good in simulation mode. In this mode, you do not have perfect tractions, and the cars have some inertia. But if you get a feel for your car, you can definitely drift around those corners still. Story, from what I've experienced so far, seems to be pretty good as well, just like Mafia 2. Some good voice acting, a decent amount of cutscenes with some eccentric characters. Although a bunch of names were being flung around which I had some difficulty keeping track of. Then again, I was distracted by the food at the event, so that might have been part of it. But the story isn't entirely chronological, it's got this sort of true detective after the fact interview style to it. And in the intro there was some skipping back and forth in time as well, so you better keep your eyes open. Now with this game being set in 1968, you've got some familiar, catchy music. And there's a hefty amount of racial tension, which definitely seemed to be one of the game's themes, what's with you being black and all that. The graphics are good, the French ward at night with its colorful lights definitely looks pretty, especially when the ground is wet and you can actually see the reflections. Now I was running the game on max settings with pretty decent FPS. I couldn't get Shadowplay's FPS counter to work for some odd reason, so I couldn't actually see a number. And the PC the demo was running on was pretty beefy, it had an i5 6600K and a 1070, so I can't really assess the performance that well. But then again, it was also a pre-release build. And finally, but definitely most importantly, there's a bunch of playboys for you to collect and read. Yeah, you can actually read them too. There's also some other real-life magazines you can collect and read, so that is a pretty neat touch. And that concludes my story / mini review of playing the game for a couple of hours. So this video is somewhat brought to you by 2K, what's with them buying me lunch and all that. But these are still my impressions of the game. Anyways, hope you enjoyed the video. If you want to see that vloggy type video where I actually go a bit more in depth about the event itself, going to Amsterdam, you should totally click on that video right now. And until next time.